Hello everyone, welcome to Programmer, the podcast where we share thoughts from everyday programmers. I'm your host Nazib, and today we are diving into a slightly controversial topic, building software without engineers. Before we dive in, let me quickly share about Postku.my. If you're a Malaysian freelancer or running a micro business, it's a free invoicing tool that keeps all your client billing neatly in one place. For 2026, with annual revenue under 1 million ringgit, you are exempt from LHDN e-invoicing, and Postku.my is built to take full advantage of that. It keeps things simple so you can focus more on your business. Joining me today is Douglas Squirrel, director of the Lone Wolves consulting firm Squirrel Squad Limited. It's great to have you. How are you?
I'm doing great and happy to speak to you, Nazib.
That's great. As an introduction, can you share your 45-year journey as a programmer, including your 20 years leading software teams? That kind of experience is truly rare.
Well, I enjoy sharing it with other people, so happy to share it with you and your listeners. So I got started when I was 6 or 7, when I got one of those ancient computers with 16K of memory, and I was very excited about having any kind of computer to work with, and I've been excited about computers ever since. When I came into the industry was about 2000, and that is when, you might all remember, I'm sure you are too young to remember, but you've probably read about the internet dot-com boom and then the dot-com bust. So there were lots and lots of companies discovering this new amazing thing called the internet, and they invested a ton of money in it, had huge, crazy valuations and crazy IPOs, and then the bottom fell out, and suddenly there wasn't any work in that area anymore. But I got in just before the crash. If that sounds like something happening today in artificial intelligence, you're paying attention. So that's the right experience. And I came in at the top when things were very, very overheated, and then survived the period after when things didn't go so well. But I worked in a number of different companies in different industries, different sorts of things, and I got to be a CTO pretty quickly. So I programmed directly for a couple of years and always had my hand in doing some programming, but became a leader at executive level within a year or two, which is unusual itself. But then a funny thing started happening, which is I kept getting fired. And I got fired in a really nice way. The CEO would come to me and sit me down and say, "Squirrel, you built this amazing team, and they have great processes, and you've trained some really good leaders, and you've hired great people, and we're very successful, and there's nothing for you to do anymore. And gee, you're kind of expensive. So would you please go and be wonderful somewhere else?" And it was this really nice way to get fired, but it happened over and over. And eventually I said to myself, after the third or fourth time, maybe there's something here. Maybe this is me. And what seemed to happen was also that the firings got closer together. In other words, I needed less time in the company before they decided I'd done what I needed to do. And so I said, maybe I could plan for that. So that's when I became a interim consultant. So I would work as a CTO for one or two companies close to full time for a while, and then I would get fired, but on purpose. It was a contract. We'd planned that I'd work there for a certain period. And that time kept getting shorter and shorter. So, I do one of those for 9 months, and then another one for 8 months, and another one for 6 months. And so these days, I now no longer call myself an interim CTO because I don't really do that, but I can have very high impact with minimal interaction. So I might interact with the company only a few times a week, but I have a huge impact on the tech team. I help them be much, much more profitable, and I also help a lot of other teams. And so I've done that for about 400 different companies on every continent except Antarctica. I'm afraid of penguins, but everywhere else, in every industry. So finance and space and biotech and music, retail and insurance, and you name it, I've wound up doing some consulting in that area for somebody trying to build technology for pretty much any end. And that's a lot of fun. I get to play around with lots of tools and technology. I wrote a book called Agile Conversations about how to talk to your tech team. I have a whole bunch of booklets I keep writing. I'm writing a new book on AI this year. So I get to write, I get to talk to interesting people like you, Nazib, and I get to experiment with tech teams and helping them be more and more and more productive.
Are you still actively programming, or was there a point where you start coding less, eventually stop altogether? Because I've been hearing mentioning that you becoming an interim CTO, you get fired nicely, and then you join back another company kind of thing. Do this process of getting hired and getting fired, getting hired and getting fired affect your journey as a programmer?
Two good questions. So, did it affect my journey overall? Yes, it did. And so I really shifted what I did, what I charged, who I worked with. So it really affected it in that way. But I still interact with code. And I guess I'd put it that way rather than saying I'm actively coding, because I help with recruitment. I just finished a booklet on the process of recruiting and how you test engineers. And so I might test engineers or test executive leaders or help to hire the CTO who will come permanently after me. And in all of those cases, I'm interacting with code and system architecture and questions of design. And so I'm working with code. I'm not necessarily writing the code. And I miss that. It would be great if I could do more writing of code. And I do when I can. That's often for personal projects, for things on my website, for experiments that I'm wanting to write about. And I'm increasingly using AI tools to do the actual work, producing the code, as I think many of us are. And so that means my direct connection to the lines of code is even more distant. But I'm evaluating code, understanding how people are using it, evaluating their ability with code. So I'm interacting with code all the time, but not necessarily writing it myself.
At this moment, are you producing any product that you built without programming?
So I'm not directly producing any products. My product is me. My company consists of me. You know, when I was on the screen with you, you were looking at my whole company. This is it, just me. But the sorts of things that my clients do involve huge amounts of code and increasingly a lot of AI work. And a lot of them are producing code with much less engineers, much less engineering involvement. Not zero. So producing code with no engineers is more rare, but has happened. And I can tell you some stories about that.
We saved the story for a question that we have. We go into a geek section. So my first question would be, which operating system do you use for programming before? Is it Windows? Is it macOS? Or is it Linux? I heard you're afraid of penguins.
That's a good point. I certainly prefer Linux for any programming, but for my sins, I use a Mac computer, not a Windows. So I stay as far from Windows as I can. A Mac computer because it's very good for things like this, recording and writing and so on. If I were programming as much as I'd like to, I'd be on a Linux machine. It's got less of the conveniences and less of the connectivity for what I do mainly these days, which is helping people and coaching them and evaluating their code and their work more than writing it myself.
When you're using Linux for programming or building things, what is your favorite or a go-to distribution?
Oh, Ubuntu, just because it's simple. And I'm not a power super duper user who needs every megawatt that I can get out of the machine. I need just enough to let me work. And Ubuntu is so easy to use and install, and it just kind of does it for you. It's kind of Linux for idiots. And as far as system administration, I'm definitely an idiot.
I see. I understand. Second question I have is, what have been your go-to tech stack or programming languages or framework in the past? What do you use now, for example, if you want to create a snippet of utilities?
Man, it's hard to pick one. So I got started the very first when I was 7 years old in level 1 basic, which was a very ancient, very simple language. And then I moved very quickly into assembly language, very close to the middle, because there wasn't anything else on those old computers. Something that was built in like BASIC, or you wrote with machine instructions. So that was a great education. I then moved on to writing programs in C and then in Java. So I kind of kept up with the industry as the standard languages evolved. And now if I had to write in something, I'd probably pick Python. You know, an awful lot of what I wind up doing is bash scripts, because it's actually very simple to write a little tool to, resize an image for my website or something like that. I don't need it to be production ready. I don't need a whole infrastructure around it. It's just for me. My clients are increasingly using Python because they're doing so much with data science. So that's, I think, what I see most in my clients.
My third question is, what is your text editor or code editor of choice? Do you use IntelliJ or VS Code before?
Yeah, Emacs. And it's not that old. Emacs is maintained and kept up to date and gives, again, a lot of control, so you can do things with it yourself. Now, I will confess, I'm not using that today. I mean, if I really want to write something, I'll just pull up ChatGPT or something like that and say, write me this code. I will copy it into a text file in whatever editor is to hand and use it.
All right. Do you use agentic editors like OpenCode, Anti-Gravity, or Windsurf when we talk about the AI?
I don't have large enough projects myself to use those. My clients definitely do, and there are great wars about which one is right, and nobody's right about the right one because they're all very, very similar, is what I find from my clients' work. For myself, I just fire up a ChatGPT instance and get a very short script. I don't need navigation of the code base and a whole bunch of agentic tools running in the background.
The last question would be, what do you like to do outside of work? Do you have any hobbies you enjoy?
I live in a 600-year-old house, and I like keeping it up to stuff and make sure it still stays up. We hope it stays standing for another 600 years. And I like that so much that I recently bought a 500-year-old house. I thought I'd try something more modern, working on that. Now, I don't do any of it myself. You would not want me with a hammer anywhere near anything. Determining the history, figuring out what we might build next, what to do to repair it, and so on. That's a big part of what I do for fun.
Let's go into question. You mentioned that when you started as a CTO 26 years ago, you made just about every mistake in the book. Is there any particularly interesting one that you can share that today's listener might relate to?
Well, here's a fun one I was telling a client about just this morning. That first company where I first got to be a CTO, we sold to really big banks and hedge funds. So very, very rich people who had tools written in Excel that you sort of hoped they were working. You never really were sure. There's no testing or anything. It was very Wild West, and a lot of that world still is. So there was one hedge fund that was our client. They wanted us to provide lots of reports for them, and we built a whole system to report on what we had in the system and what we'd done for them and how they were trading and what money they were making. And I noticed one day, to my horror, in the log files that a particular report was taking 5 minutes, sometimes 7 or 10 minutes to run. So you'd click the button, you'd see a little spinny thing. You couldn't do anything else with our application, and you had to wait. We weren't going to give you a report, and we weren't going to give you anything else to do. I thought, oh my God, this is terrible, because 7 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever is a lifetime in finance, right? The stock market can move, there can be big news, people are making fortunes in that time, and you're sitting there watching a spinner. So I thought, man, we got to fix this. Now, luckily, the thing I didn't make a mistake on was going and asking the customer what they thought. So I went to see the person who ran the hedge fund, a very rich gentleman who had a fancy office, and went to see him there. And I pointed out this problem, expecting that he would say, great, you got to fix that right now. What are you doing? Get your butt moving. And very surprisingly to me, this was the mistake I made, assuming that he would say that. He said, do you know who runs that report? And I said, no, I don't. Somebody in your organization here. And he said, yes, but it's somebody in a faraway country that's on the other side of the planet. And not only that, they're an outside contractor, and I pay them by the hour, and I pay them well, and I'm happy with them. I'm glad they do what they do, but I don't need them to go fast. I will buy them a new coffee machine so they can drink extra cups of coffee while I'm sleeping and they're running this report. So I don't care how fast it is. But what I do care about is that it be slick and shiny and have beautiful things in it, wonderful graphs, so I can make more money taking the report to my clients and getting more investment and doing more stuff. So please make the report better, but don't make it faster. And that was a very instructive mistake, because it's so common, I call it betterism, that somebody will read about something in a blog post or listen to a podcast like this or notice something in the log file like I did and say, there's a better way, we should do this better. And I don't let my clients say the word better for this reason, because it may not be better for your customer. It may not be better for your profit. And the important thing is to understand what makes it better, and is that really better for you?
Usually people or programmers sees improvement that can be made through something that they can benchmark or they can measure, for example, speed. But in your case, I think I would do the same mistake, because I'm not considering what is the intention between that slowness of thing. In this story, do you change anything, or have you done anything with the script?
So in that case, when it actually happened 20 years ago, so it was a very long time ago, I did not make that report go faster. I did what the client asked for, and he was right, because when I made the report better and my team made the report look better, be designed better, and so on, he was very happy and paid us more money. That was how I knew that we were doing well. What I do now is I tell people that story, the people that I'm coaching and helping and that were on the projects I'm working on for clients, and what I tell them is, don't assume that what you think is better. Just because you can measure it and you think it's not the way you would like it to be, may not be the right way to think about it. Here's another really quick one. I was around when Twitter got started. I doubt you're old enough to know this, but do you know what the fail whale whale is for Twitter?
No.
Just look it up. It's a fun thing to look up and understand. When Twitter got started, about 25% of the time, so really, really often, you would type in your 140 characters, that's all we got back then, and you would get not your tweet is out, here it is, ready to share, but the fail whale, which was a picture of a whale, and it said, sorry, something went wrong. Try again. And you had to type your 140 characters again. Now, you might think that's a terrible disaster. That's going to kill the company. But it was growing so fast, and the investment, what you lost was very small. It was a very brief bit of typing. People didn't care. They just said, great, I'll type it again. There are actually websites devoted to the fail whale. People got excited about it. It was kind of a marketing thing in a sort of strange way. What you think is better, i.e., you actually type something and it stays there. You might think that's better. It wasn't better. If Twitter had spent time on trying to make that not happen, and instead of trying to get more people on Twitter, they would not have been as successful. Now, what's happened to them recently is a whole different story, but you might have noticed Twitter did pretty well despite having had that scaling problem in its first few years.
I believe the one most important thing that I always tell my juniors or my peers is that if you have an assumption, don't assume things. Ask question, make sure you validate your assumption. Alright, let's go to the next question. I'm sure many programmers dream of becoming a CTO or at least a tech lead. What does a CTO do, and is it possible for a company to have only CTO without a CEO?
So those are two really different but really good questions. First of all, what a CTO does, in my view, is make profit for the company, help the company sell more, reduce costs, both of the above, through technology. And the CTO is the senior executive in charge of that outcome. That person should be very focused on what the outcome is. And far too many CTOs, as we've just been saying, are too focused on apparent metrics, apparent value, and they never check that the value is actually there for real customers. So that's what I'd say a CTO does. Mechanically, what you do is lead a team that produces those kinds of results and so on. But I think the most important thing about what a CTO does is connect what engineers are doing to profit and value and results for customers, and make sure everyone stays on mission to produce those things. Now, you asked me a second question, which was really different. Remind me, what was the second question?
Is it possible for a company to have only CTO without a CEO?
Yes, but it's very difficult. The reason for that is simple. CEO has a very different job from the CTO. CTO, I was just saying, should be connecting technical excellence and technical results to business results. But if you want to try to run with a CTO who's going to look out for the rest of the company in the way a CEO needs to, that person's going to need to know enough about marketing and enough about customer service and enough about operations and enough about industry trends to be an effective CEO. And there are few, but not zero, CTOs who are like that. A wonderful client I've had over many years who is exactly that. She could be a CEO overnight if she wanted to be, because she's got so many broad and overlapping skills. But that's very rare. The number of people who are like her and who can effectively lead a whole organization, look after all the aspects of a company, those are few and far between.
For a CTO, does it really needs to be in a technical background, or it can be a QA background, or it can be a product background? What do you think?
It's tough to come to CTO specifically without the background. It's easier in some other executive roles to run, say, sales without having a marketing background, or to run a customer service heavy organization without as much technology background or data science or something. But it's hard to go the other way. And so, yes, I think you can do it. I have some examples in my broad set of clients. Most of the time, it's pretty tough.
Thank you for the insight. So let's dive into today's topic, building software without engineers. How is it even possible, and why would anyone try it? With no coders on the team, it sounds very risky. But with the rise of no-code or AI tools, some startups are challenging the traditional way of doing things. What are your thoughts on this?
I have a fun story, which is from about 2010, I think, maybe 2015, somewhere around there, more than a decade ago. A company came to me, and the CEO said, "Squirrel, we don't know what we have built. We have built something, and it does an amazing job in our industry, and no one else has solved this problem, and we've just put it together. I kept wondering when we would need engineers, and we never did. And what they had done is they had started with Airtable, and they had hooked it up to many different things and created this whole kind of complex tower of little pieces that all talk to each other. We've built more stuff around this now, so we have things like Zapier and If This Then That and other tools that make this easier. We didn't have any of that. So these guys had just hacked it together any way they could. They cut and paste in one place, and they'd add something to another place, and they'd call an API in the third place, and they made the thing work somehow to produce really valuable insights that nobody else had that were very valuable. Customers were willing to pay lots of money for them. But the question that folks who had done this asked was, Squirrel, what do we call this? So we have to go take this to investors and try to raise some money and grow this further and so on. And we have this wacky machine that has all these strange pieces, and it does this thing. What do we call it? And I thought for a while, and because it was kind of a cool term at the time, I told them, call it serverless, because you don't have to administer any servers. You don't have to run anything. They said, that's great. And they raised money, and they have done very well. That's an example very early, without some of the tools we have today, of building software with no engineers at all. It was kind of a miracle that it worked. It wasn't very stable. It wasn't very well built. It wasn't beautifully architected. But man, it produced an awful lot of value. This is pretty common in the finance industry today, is people just create whatever crazy thing they can in Excel, get an advantage in the market that makes them lots of money. View on this is, it can work. You have to be willing to put up with a lot of mess, a lot of debt and problems and things that you're going to have to clean up later. But if you're willing to put up with that, and there are cases where that's very manageable, then you can get a very good result. It comes with many warnings and cautionary flags.
Can the software really scale and stay reliable without engineers?
You can make substantial changes and improvements, and the AI really does help with that, but only so far. So for example, there's a very interesting tools like Replit and Manus and others that will produce what is essentially a prototype, although they don't call it that. I think they'd be more responsible if they did, but they'll produce something that does the basics of what you want. It will draw you a chart of your sales and show you where your sales soft points, weak points are. It will analyze your financial data. It will analyze your usage data. It'll do something for you, but all you have done is prompted it. And that's amazing. That's just, I wouldn't have believed that 10 years ago if someone told us it was going to exist. But it doesn't produce something that's robust and scalable and handles all the weird edge cases and is ready for compliance and ready for legal to have a look and everything else. It's, you touch it and it falls over. It does enough. It gives you an idea of what the system should do, but it is not a full system. It's not scalable. It's not maintainable. It doesn't have tests. And we're getting better at that. We're starting to have some of those production stability attributes from what comes out from these things, but it's very early days. So my recommendation is that people not rely on what comes out of a Replit or anything similar, but they get engineers involved once they've proven that whatever they want to do is feasible and interesting. And that's the point at which you bring in the humans who can provide an awful lot of additional value, stabilize the system so it's actually usable. But it's not usable when it first comes out of a code generation tool like that.
When will that point, and how to actually know at what point they should have an engineer?
Earlier than you think. The temptation for non-technical people, and I know your audience, Nazib, is a technical one, but far too many people who are in charge of the finances say, hey, we got these great engineers, they're building this great thing with AI. I don't really need to have anybody looking over it. I can just run it in production. Nothing could be more dangerous. Nothing could be more wrong. The problem is that the tools produce something that works for a couple of users, doesn't work for 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000. Really, if you're far enough along that it's time to ask the question, that's the time you need some humans. Maybe not very many in the versions. These tools, even the most sophisticated ones that have super agentic workflows and very sophisticated mechanisms inside them to do multi-agent responses and everything else, those ones still produce, doesn't scale, doesn't handle all the edge cases, isn't sufficient for real production use. And that's okay, because we can save an awful lot of time, production of tests in the initial prototyping and verifying, and that's a great place to save money and time. Just don't let it near production, please.
You're giving us a good perspective, I would say, because if we talk about building software without engineers, for the new engineers coming in the industry, will be very worried whether or not they will be replaced by AI or these AI coding tools.
Stop worrying about that. That's silly.
What do you think of that? Why do you say not to worry about that kind of concern?
It's just misplaced worry, because I was, as I said at the top, I was involved in seeing the industry crash way back in 2000, and a lot of people were very worried, and people did lose their jobs, and there were reductions, and we have seen that now, and programmer salaries are not as high or inflated, or people aren't in as much demand as they were just a few years ago. But the industry is still very healthy. There's still plenty of work. There's still plenty plenty of demand for software. None of that has gone away. What I see over and over again is that demand stays very high. People still really want the dream of programming without engineers. They're not going to get exactly that dream, but there are lots of ways that we can be more efficient, that we can save money and produce the same amount of software, same quality of software for less investment. We're just not going to do it without humans at all. We're going to have humans involved in code review, in testing, in verifying, in guiding, in finding hallucinations, all of those sorts of things. Whereas the computer can do a lot of the grunt work of actually grinding out the lines of code.
I actually agree with your perspective of building software without engineers, where you can start prototype early. This also can improve the communication between the product kind of thing. So for example, the requirement and stuff, where to put this, how to communicate between services, what the client wants, before you actually engage to an engineer that might or might not be able to do that kind of implementation. For example, their expertise is not as what required to produce that product. Employer can actually draft what they want to do and probably just go through all the candidates to actually check whether or not you can do like this, whether or not you can do like that, instead of just keep hiring and then people just quit because I think this is too futuristic or too advanced for them, right? Let's talk a bit about technology teams, because we mentioned about the AI tools, no code tools to actually assist the product and also stakeholders to actually produce something from their mind, what their thoughts of. Why do technology teams so hard to manage? Is it the mix of personalities, the fast changing tools, or the pressure to deliver quickly? And how much do factor like remote works, technical debt, and conflicting priorities make it even trickier? Does the expertise of that technology teams also contribute to this fact?
Yeah, they're too smart. And that's why engineers, they're usually smart arses. They're difficult to deal with because they have too high an opinion of themselves. Now, that's being a bit mean, but what I will say is that a lot of software engineers are autistic. A lot of them are undiagnosed, unevaluated, and people who lead technology organizations, particularly very sophisticated ones like your listeners probably are, that are trying to do something difficult technologically or organizationally, tends to attract autistic people because computers, guess what, are very autistic. They're like ones and zeros. They're very limited in their responses and they're rigid in their approach. So people who are like that are attracted to computers. And that makes them hard to manage because the world outside the technology organization is not ones and zeros. It's lots of shades of gray. And engineers don't deal well with that, neither do the computers. Reason that engineers, I think, are so difficult to manage is they're never taught how to communicate. Nobody really sits down in your computer science curriculum and explains that this is what people actually mean when they give you a requirement. It means they have a half-baked idea they don't really understand, and there are reasons psychologically why humans can't explain their ideas clearly enough for a computer. Brains just aren't, any of our brains are not really capable of that. When someone says it's a requirement, it's the worst possible name for what they want you to do. It's not what they require. It's a sort of vague, half-baked initial stab at what they would like to try. And that kind of translation of words that have very clear, simple meanings into what people actually mean by them is difficult for autistic people, difficult for most people of any type, makes engineers particularly difficult to manage because you ask them to do something and they do what you ask them.
Is there any advice to want to give to technology team, engineer, or any role related to this to actually be better so that it doesn't make the technology team so hard to manage?
Thing that you do with anything that you're not very good at, and especially that human beings are not good at, is you practice it. Human beings are not very efficient runners, right? Our legs are not designed, pelvis is too far apart, we're not a cheetah, a jaguar or something, a very fast animal. We're a pretty slow animal. But if you want to be a fast runner, just look at Gout, who's an amazing upcoming sprinter in Australia, in your part of the world. He trains every day for hours and hours and hours and hours, a young teenager, and he runs 100 meters in under 10 seconds. If you practice this type of communication and practice getting better at having conversations in which, for example, you ask a question, look at a lot of my clients' conversations, they never ask any questions. Guess what? They never learn anything. It's just not natural to humans to behave in this way, so they have to practice. My book, Agile Conversations, has a whole bunch of techniques and tools like test-driven development for people and so on, and opportunities to practice. But if you don't like my book, there's lots of other places and things you could do to practice. But you have to take it seriously, just like if you want to run 100 meters fast. You don't just wake up in the morning and think, try that. You have to practice over a long period to get good at it.
is this idea of technology teams seems so hard to manage become a point where they think building software without engineers is an option?
Oh, sure. Yes, that's one reason everybody would like to build software without all those pesky engineers. The problem is that you can't get rid of them yet, at least. We haven't built tools that are sophisticated enough, and we're not very close. Having agents and LLMs and AIs, or whatever you want to call them, that produce error-free, highly reliable, high-quality, easily understandable software. They produce kind of a mishmash of messy stuff, that some of which is right and some of which is wrong, and you have to pick through it and figure out what to do with it. Guess what? That's just like a junior member of the tech team, and we've been helping those people a long time. So our senior and more experienced engineers are capable of doing that, and that's a good thing to do to make them more effective. But what you can't do is get the human out of the loop, just like we haven't got self-driving cars yet. No matter what Mr. Musk wants us all to believe about Teslas, they can't actually drive themselves, and only in very good conditions and very simple situations can other manufacturers actually have a car get from one place to another by itself. Still need a human behind the wheel, and we're going to need that for a long time. Same with technology. You're not going to have software built completely with no annoying engineers in the way, but what you can have is much better prototyping. It's much closer to the actual users. Excel was a revolution like this. Well, with spreadsheets for people who work with lots and lots of numbers, totally new way to produce a piece of software that they could produce themselves, that did whatever it is they wanted. They could go in and change the formulas, and that was really the revolution. We now have the ability to prototype, not produce finished software, but to prototype exactly what it is that we want. And that avoids a lot of problems in the communication, and that's a good thing. But what it doesn't do is eliminate those pesky geeks who are always, speaking in Klingon. We still got to deal with that. I'm glad about that, because I am one.
Yep, that's all for our episode today. Do you have anything to talk about?
No, this has been fun, Nazeb. This is great stuff. Good questions. I enjoyed the conversation.
That's great. Before we end this episode, do you have any plugins, call to action, or way to communicate with you? Your social media like LinkedIn, or probably you can talk a bit about Squirrel Squadron. Probably you can redirect them to your YouTube or website.
Let me just keep it simple. Nazeb, people should just go to douglassquirrel.com or to squirrelsquadron.com. They both work. They get you to different parts of what I do, but it's all the same thing. And there's loads of material there, free stuff, my book, Agile Conversations, all kinds of other things people can argue with me about or learn more about at either of those places.
Is there any ongoing project and upcoming events that you would like to mention so that the listener can know, oh, okay, I'm interested to this, so that they can go into your websites?
Sure. Well, if you go to squirrelsquadron.com, by the time you listen to this, there will be new events. I do them every couple of weeks. And these are free events on live stream or on Zoom, and I do them on all kinds of topics. So the one coming this week is about what methodologies to use and why it doesn't really matter, how you can get your tech work done and track it. And next week, I'm actually doing a live event in person in London, and that's all about, guess what? We were talking about how to use AIs effectively, use them effectively without chatting. So without having a prompt window or prompt engineering or any of that stuff. How could you use AI to get great results that don't involve chatting? Those are the sorts of things I do all the time. Check out squirrelsquadron.com to see them.
That's wrap up today's episode. A big thank to you, Squirrel, for sharing such valuable thoughts. It was truly a great pleasure having you. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow and share it. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.